Well, hey, so we're going to look at the Founding Fathers some more today. And today the categories that we're going to look at are ratifying the Constitution, George Washington, first president, and political parties emerge. And ratifying the Constitution basically means that they approve it, that it comes to fruition, and that we get to use it. You know that George Washington was the commander-in-chief of the First Continental Army, and then he becomes our first president in our new United States of America. And then the political parties emerge. Emerge means that they come out. We start to see them. And today the political parties you're most familiar with are the Democrats and the Republicans. And so perhaps you'll hear that kind of language. So we're looking for our new political parties that come out, and we're going to look at how this Constitution gets approved. Hope you're ready. And remember, taking some notes under these headings would be really, really a good idea. Ratifying the Constitution. The Constitution, which was signed on September 17th, 1787, at the Constitutional Convention, did not come into force immediately. It had to be ratified, or approved, by at least 9 of the 13 states. The states debate. A few days after the Constitution was signed, Congress sent printed copies of it to all 13 states. Each state held a meeting to discuss it. This was the first chance for American citizens to talk about the plans for a new government. 5 state conventions voted to approve the Constitution almost immediately: Delaware, Pennsylvania, New Jersey, Georgia, Connecticut. Other states were less certain, and very soon a split had opened up between those in favor and those not in favor of the Constitution. The future of the fledgling United States was in the hands of the American people. Federalists in favor. People who supported the Constitution called themselves Federalists. Many were rich business people, such as property owners, planters, and merchants, and professional people, including lawyers. Supporters tended to live in towns, not in the countryside. The Federalist cause was helped because the 2 most famous men in America, Benjamin Franklin, above Pennsylvania, and George Washington, Virginia, supported it. Also, because most newspapers were owned by Federalists, they printed articles, the Federalist Papers, in favor of the Constitution. Anti-Federalists, not in favor. People opposed to the Constitution were called Anti-Federalists. Their greatest fear was that individual states would have power taken away from them by a national government, leaving them weaker than before. Anti-Federalists tended to live in the countryside, where they worked on small farms. Like the Federalists, they also had influential men on their side: Patrick Henry, whose picture is going to be above. We've got Benjamin Franklin and Patrick Henry. And Richard Henry Lee from Virginia, James Winthrop from Massachusetts, and George Clinton, New York. All criticized the Constitution. So here they are looking very dour and serious about this situation, and we have the Federalists and the Anti-Federalists. So ratification of the Constitution. State, Delaware. Date of entry into the Union, December 7th, 1787. Pennsylvania, New Jersey, Georgia, joined January 2nd, 1788. Connecticut, Massachusetts, Maryland, South Carolina, New Hampshire, Virginia, New York, North Carolina. And let's see, North Carolina didn't join until November 21st, 1789. And Rhode Island didn't join until May 29th of 1790. So you can see that it took a long time for this to work itself out. Federalist Papers. In an effort to persuade voters to approve the Constitution, Federalist James Madison from Virginia, Alexander Hamilton, and John Jay from New York used newspapers to spread their message. Between 1787 and 1788, they wrote 85 essays that explained what it would mean to have a national government. Most of these Federalist Papers were first printed in New York state newspapers. after which they were printed in newspapers in other states. The essays convinced people to vote in favor of the Constitution. The identity of the three authors, Madison, Hamilton, and Jay, was a closely guarded secret, and instead of using their own names, each essay was attributed to the made-up author, Publius. The Federal Papers helped to promote the Constitution as a good idea for the people of America. Political cartoons showing the states as a series of pillars. The message was, united they stand, divided they fall. Now, I've heard that amongst American rhetoric forever, and that's interesting that that comes directly from our Federalist Papers. A more perfect union. By June 21st, 1788, 9 of the 13 states had voted to ratify the Constitution. On that day, the opening words of the Constitution, "We the people, in order to form a more perfect union," had become true. By late May 1790, the remaining 4 states had also voted in favor. So, here are some images from the first early newspapers. Here's the list of the states who ratified the Constitution, and here are our pillars. United we stand, divided we fall. It's good rhetoric for today as well, I believe. George Washington, first president. 6 months after the Constitution was ratified, approved, the process of electing the first president of the United States began. The election was held over 27 days, from December 15th, 1788 to January 10th, 1789. How should a president be addressed? It was soon decided that President Washington should be greeted as Mr. President. It set the style that is used to this day. Only one candidate. Unlike a modern-day presidential election in which there are several candidates to choose from, the election of 1789 had only one candidate, George Washington, the hero of the American Revolutionary War. He had presided over the 1787 Constitutional Convention, had signed the Constitution, and he had helped in the lengthy process of ratifying it. With that work over, Washington had hoped to retire to his Mount Vernon farm in Virginia. But his role in the forming of the country had been so important that all eyes were on him to become the nation's first president. As expected, Washington won the election. Inauguration. After he was elected, Washington traveled from Mount Vernon to New York, and along the way, people came out to greet him. He crossed the Hudson River in a specially built barge decorated in red, white, and blue, then made his way to Federal Hall on Wall Street in New York. There, on April 30th, 1789, he stood on the balcony and was sworn in, or inaugurated, as the first president of the United States. George Washington arrives in New York on a boat, board a barge. It was rowed by 13 men, and the ship fired a 13-gun salute. Oh, the symbolism there is kind of cool. 13 men rowed it, 13-gun salute, 13 original colonies. That's neat. He was indeed, in every sense of the word, a wise, a good, and a great man. Thomas Jefferson describing George Washington. Lasting legacy. George Washington proved to be an excellent first president. His presidential powers were laid out in the Constitution, and he followed them carefully. By doing this, he set a good example for all later presidents to follow and earned respect for the United States from world powers such as Great Britain, France, and Spain. In 1791, he helped choose a site for the nation's new capital. The city was to be built along the Potomac River and was named Washington in his honor. So there's an interesting thing that the history of these people echo in our government today, and we should be mindful of that and uphold that. And example setting is done by leading with the correct example. Interesting concept. Whiskey Rebellion. The first real test of the new government was in 1794. When farmers in Pennsylvania began a rebellion, they were unhappy about having to pay a new tax on alcohol, and when government officials tried to collect the money, the farmers attacked them. After President Washington ordered 13,000 troops into the area from neighboring states, the farmers withdrew and the rebellion came to an end. It showed the power of the national government and the authority of the president as leader of the nation. Final years. Washington was such a popular president that some people wanted him to carry on forever, but he couldn't. The Constitution fixed a president's term of office at 4 years. Washington's first term came to an end in 1792, and in the election that followed, he was re-elected for a second term. He refused to stand for a third term and retired in 1797. His last years were spent at his Mount Vernon home, where he died in 1799. A tax collector is covered in sticky tar and feathered by farmers opposed to the tax on alcohol. That's probably not good. George Washington's tomb at his home at Mount Vernon. So here we go. Tarred and feathered was a way that people treated others when they were against what they did. The outcome's not good. All right, political parties emerge. All governments have people with strong views, and during George Washington's presidency, this was no different. Toward the end of his first term, 2 of his most senior officials disagreed over how the government should work. As the differences of opinion grew, the first political parties emerged, the Federalists and the Democrat-Republicans. Alexander Hamilton and Thomas Jefferson are going to be part of this. An old argument. Washington was disappointed that Alexander Hamilton and Thomas Jefferson disagreed so strongly. Their argument was getting more heated, and the issue wasn't going away. In fact, it had been around for a long time, and now was splitting the government in two. The question of how much power the government should have had already been raised at the drafting of the Constitution and during its ratification, and yet it was still not resolved. When Washington gave his farewell address in 1796 at the end of his second term, he warned against the creation of political factions, but by then it was too late to change the course of history. The Federalist Party. Alexander Hamilton became the leader of the Federalist Party, which was formed in 1791. Hamilton believed in a strong and powerful national government led by talented, well-educated people. Federalists believed the government should 1. Take responsibility for the debt from the Revolutionary War. 2. Raise money through taxes. 3. Create a central bank. And 4. Give favorable treatment to American shipping and merchants. So this is not a new issue in our country, right? We still talk about these things today. How to deal with trade, how to get taxes, how to deal with banks. The Democratic-Republican Party. Please note, those two were the name of one party at one time. Thomas Jefferson became the leader of the Democrat-Republican Party. It was formed in 1792 as an opposing party to the Federalists. Jefferson was opposed to an all-powerful national government. His greatest fear was that ordinary Americans would lose their liberty, that they would not be listened to. Republicans, as they were known, believed national government had too much power. The president could start to act like a king or a dictator. A Federalist government favored the rich at the expense of the poor, and education was the key to improving people's lives. The Providential Detection. A political cartoon attacked Thomas Jefferson. It showed him kneeling before an altar, on top of which a fire burns. Jefferson is about to throw the U.S. Constitution onto the fire, but he's stopped from doing so by an American eagle. So political cartoons have had their place in our history for a long time. And you can see that some of these issues still exist today, state versus federal governments. Boys and girls, I hope you enjoyed that edition of Americans' Early History, and we'll come back to the Founding Fathers another day. Bye.